Silence is one of the most misunderstood forces in human interaction. When someone pulls away, remains distant, or watches from the shadows without making a move, it creates a void, one that most people instinctively try to fill. The mind races to explain why. Is something I did? Is he waiting for the right moment? Is he playing games? That space of uncertainty becomes a breeding ground for overthinking, doubt, and emotional turmoil. But the truth is, silence is not an invitation to wait or to wonder. It is a tool, a weapon, and a test. The way you respond to silence determines your power. When someone is watching but not reaching out, their silence is telling you more than words ever could. They are speaking through inaction. In a world where communication is easier than ever, where a message can be sent in seconds, where a phone call takes no effort, someone choosing not to speak is making a deliberate decision. And that decision is the only closure you will ever need. The problem is that most people refuse to accept it. Instead, they try to decode the silence, assign meaning to it, or wait for it to change. But silence does not change. Only your response to it does. The moment you try to break the silence first, you lose. The moment you start analyzing why they are not reaching out, you give away your power. Because silence is a test. It is a test of your self-worth, your emotional strength, and your ability to control your own narrative. And many people fail because they react from a place of insecurity rather than power. They text first. They ask indirect questions. They post something in hopes of getting a reaction. But every action that stems from insecurity only reinforces the power imbalance. It signals that the other person's silence has control over your emotions. Silence is a mirror. It forces people to face themselves. The one who remains silent and distant is often dealing with their own internal struggles, fear, uncertainty, regret, or ego. But the one who is on the receiving end of that silence is also forced to confront something within themselves. Why does this silence bother me? Why do I need an answer? Why do I crave their validation? That discomfort is the real lesson. It reveals where you are still emotionally attached, where your wounds are still open, and where you need to heal. Most people don't realize that responding to silence with silence is one of the most powerful moves you can make. It shifts the energy completely. When someone expects you to react, to chase, to seek answers, and you don't, they feel it. The person who chooses silence and expects you to break first begins to wonder why you aren't affected. And that's when the power shifts. They start thinking about you more. They start questioning their own actions, because suddenly their silence is no longer something they are controlling. It has become something they are trapped in. People who watch from a distance but never reach out are stuck in their own mind. They are stuck in indecision, in ego, in unresolved emotions. And that is not your burden to carry. If they wanted to speak, they would. If they wanted to act, they would, but instead they remain frozen, observing, but never engaging. And when you recognize that their silence is not about you, you free yourself from its grip. Most people fear silence because it creates space for the unknown, but the truth is, silence creates clarity. When words stop, the truth surfaces. When someone stops engaging, their real intentions become clear. And instead of fearing silence, you must learn to embrace it, to use it as a filter, to let it reveal who truly values you and who does not. Because a person who genuinely wants to be in your life will never stay in the shadows. They will step forward. They will reach out. They will make an effort. And if they don't, that is your answer. Silence is not a weakness. It is not a passive state. It is a deliberate choice, a powerful move, a strategy that forces people to reveal their true colors. It demands self-control. It requires you to master your emotions rather than be ruled by them, because the person who can sit in silence, unbothered, untouched by the absence of another, is the person who has mastered themselves. And self-mastery is the ultimate power. When someone watches from a distance but refuses to reach out, the natural tendency is to interpret their silence as rejection. The human mind seeks patterns, explanations, and closure. And when there are no words, when there is no direct action, it starts filling in the blanks. It assumes the worst. He must not care. He must have moved on. He must not think I'm worth his time. This is where negative emotions start to take over. The silence begins to feel personal. It begins to feel like a deliberate dismissal, an intentional act of neglect. But this is where most people get it wrong. His distance is not about you, it is about him. It is not a rejection, it is a reflection of his own state of mind, his fears, his unresolved emotions, or his ego. People project their internal struggles onto the world around them. A man who watches but does not act is often battling something within himself. It may be uncertainty, it may be pride, it may be fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, or even regret. But whatever the reason, it has nothing to do with your worth. It has everything to do with where he is mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. When you understand this, you stop taking it personally. You stop assuming that his silence is a statement about you and begin to see it as a window into him. This is where emotional mastery comes into play. Because most people, when faced with silence, react emotionally. They spiral into overthinking, self-doubt, and insecurity. They start questioning themselves. What did I do wrong? Should I have said something different? Maybe I should reach out first. But all of these reactions come from a flawed assumption that his behavior is a measurement of your value, and that assumption is false. When a person holds back, watches from a distance, and refuses to engage, they are exposing a weakness within themselves. They are revealing that they are either too afraid to communicate, too caught up in their own pride, or too emotionally conflicted to take action. Either way, it has nothing to do with whether you are good enough. It has everything to do with where they are on their own personal journey. And when you grasp this, when you internalize this truth, you free yourself from the emotional burden of waiting for their validation. This is where most people make their biggest mistake. Instead of recognizing that distance is a reflection of the other person's struggles, they start chasing. They try to pull the person closer. They try to fix the situation. They try to get a response, a sign, something that reassures them that they are still valued. But chasing after someone who is choosing silence is a losing battle. Because a person who is unwilling to step forward, to communicate, to show up with clarity is not in a place to offer anything real, and no amount of effort on your part can change that. The truth is, a man who values you will never leave you questioning where you stand. He will not stay in the shadows. He will not leave you in a space of uncertainty. And if he does, that alone is your answer. Because silence is an action. Distance is a choice. And people show you who they are, not just through what they say, but through what they do not say, through what they refuse to do. The way you respond to his absence determines your strength. Most people let it consume them. They allow the distance to create a narrative of unworthiness. They let the silence trigger insecurities they have not healed. But the people who understand that distance is not rejection, they move differently. They do not internalize someone else's hesitation. They do not wait for clarity that should have already been given. They do not put their life on hold for someone who is unable to step forward. This is about reclaiming your power. It is about refusing to let someone else's lack of action dictate how you feel about yourself. Because in the end, the person watching from afar is the one who is stuck. They are the one who cannot decide, who cannot move, who cannot communicate. And that is not your burden to carry. When you stop viewing their absence as a rejection and start seeing it as a reflection, you regain control. You stop chasing closure. You stop seeking explanations. You start moving forward. And when you do, you realize that the only person who was ever truly waiting was him. Emotional detachment is one of the most powerful skills you can develop when dealing with people who watch but never reach out. It is the ability to observe without reacting, to acknowledge without absorbing, and to remain unaffected by the silence of another person. Most people believe that emotional detachment means becoming cold, distant, or indifferent, but that is not the case. True emotional detachment is not about shutting down your emotions. It is about mastering them. It is about maintaining control over your inner world, regardless of what is happening around you. When someone is watching but never making a move, they are testing your ability to remain unshaken. They are, whether consciously or unconsciously, waiting to see if you will react. They may be hoping that their silence will provoke something from you, a response, a message, a sign that you are affected by their absence. But when you remain emotionally detached, you take away their power. You shift the dynamic entirely. Most people become emotionally attached to situations because they overinvest in the outcome. They place too much weight on what the other person does or does not do, allowing it to dictate their emotions. They build expectations around how someone should act, how things should unfold, and when reality does not align with those expectations, they experience disappointment, frustration, and even resentment. But emotional detachment eliminates this entirely. When you detach from expectation, you free yourself from the emotional roller coaster that other people's actions or inactions can create. Think about how many times you have been emotionally affected by someone who withdrew, who distanced themselves, who refused to communicate. The reason it hurt was not just because of their silence, but because of what their silence represented to you. It triggered deeper wounds. Abandonment, rejection, a feeling of being unseen or unappreciated. But what if you remove those layers? What if you saw silence for what it is rather than what your emotions are trying to make it mean? This is what true emotional detachment looks like. It is the ability to separate facts from feelings. The fact is simple. If someone wanted to reach out, they would. The feeling, however, is what causes distress. The assumption that their silence must mean you are not valuable enough, that their distance must mean you did something wrong. But once you train your mind to focus only on the facts, you stop allowing feelings to distort reality. Emotional detachment does not mean you do not care. It does not mean you are heartless or unbothered by human connection. It simply means that you refuse to be controlled by it. It means that you prioritize your own peace over seeking explanations that will never come. Because the truth is, the more you seek closure from someone who refuses to give it, the more you trap yourself in an emotional cycle that serves no purpose. People hold on to pain longer than they need to because they keep reopening wounds that should have been left to heal. They analyze messages, replay conversations, wonder what they could have done differently, all while the other person remains silent, unchanged, and unaffected. This is what keeps people stuck. This is what keeps them emotionally entangled in a situation that should have already been released. But when you master detachment, you stop reopening wounds. You stop looking for answers outside of yourself. You stop needing a resolution that was never yours to create in the first place. Most people believe that time heals all wounds, but this is not true. Time does not heal. Only perspective does. You can sit in silence for months, waiting, hoping, overanalyzing, and you will not feel any better if your mindset remains the same. But the moment you change your perspective, the pain disappears almost instantly. The moment you detach, the moment you stop needing an answer, the weight lifts. This is the power of emotional detachment. It is the ability to decide in an instant that you will no longer carry what does not belong to you. People who watch but never act are often trapped in their own emotional turmoil. They are weighed down by indecision, by pride, by unresolved feelings they are unwilling to confront. But that is their burden, not yours. When you detach, you recognize that their inability to move has nothing to do with you. You understand that you are not responsible for pulling them out of their own shadows. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. Mastering emotional detachment is not about avoiding emotions. It is about owning them. It is about deciding where your energy goes, what deserves your attention, and what no longer serves you. It is about reclaiming your peace, no longer being affected by someone who cannot decide what they want, and walking away from anything that does not align with your self-respect. Self-worth is the foundation of everything you allow into your life. When you truly understand your value, you stop seeking validation from those who refuse to acknowledge you. You stop waiting for messages that never come. You stop searching for closure from someone who has already made the decision through silence. The way people treat you is a direct reflection of what they believe they can get away with. But the way you respond to that treatment is a direct reflection of how much you value yourself. When someone watches you but refuses to reach out, they are testing the limits of your patience, your self-respect, and your emotional boundaries. And how you handle that situation determines whether you are operating from a place of strength or a place of insecurity. Most people struggle with self-worth because they allow external circumstances to dictate how they feel about themselves. They tie their value to how others respond to them. If someone reaches out, they feel worthy. This is a dangerous mindset because it puts your self-esteem in the hands of people who may not even understand their own emotions. But when you build unshakable self-worth, you stop allowing other people's actions to determine your sense of value. You realize that your worth is not dependent on who acknowledges you, who stays, who leaves, or who watches in silence. Your worth is inherent. It does not fluctuate based on someone else's inability to appreciate it. The mistake most people make is believing that if they just prove themselves, if they just show how kind, loving, and patient they are, the other person will eventually recognize their value and come forward. But this is a flawed way of thinking. You should never have to convince someone to see your worth. You should never have to wait for recognition, approval, or acknowledgement. Because the truth is, the right people never need convincing. The right people recognize your value from the start. They do not hesitate. They do not stay in the shadows. They do not watch from a distance while expecting you to wait in uncertainty. One of the most powerful things you can do when someone refuses to step forward is to hold your ground. To remind yourself that your value does not decrease simply because someone fails to see it. To understand that when someone remains silent, it is not a reflection of you. It is a reflection of them. Maybe they are too afraid to be vulnerable. Maybe they are battling their own pride. Maybe they are stuck in a cycle of indecision. But none of these things are your responsibility to fix. None of these things should make you question your own worth. People often settle for less because they do not fully grasp their own value. They tolerate mistreatment, inconsistency, and emotional distance because deep down, they believe that is the best they can get. But when you step into a place of real self-worth, you stop accepting the bare minimum. You stop entertaining situations that leave you confused, anxious, and waiting for answers. You stop giving time and energy to people who do not reciprocate the effort. One of the strongest signs of self-worth is the ability to walk away from anything that does not align with your standards. The ability to say, I am not waiting for someone to figure out if I am worth their time. I already know my worth, and I will not entertain anyone who does not see it. This is not arrogance. This is not pride. This is self-respect. And the moment you embrace this mindset, everything changes. People sense when you know your worth. They can feel it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you communicate, in the way you refuse to settle for less. And ironically, when you stop waiting, when you stop seeking validation, that is when the very people who ignored you suddenly start paying attention. Because self-worth is magnetic. Confidence is attractive. But by the time they realize your value, it will no longer matter because you will have already moved on. Most people spend too much time hoping that someone will recognize what they bring to the table. They waste energy trying to prove their worth to people who are not even paying attention. But the truth is, the moment you start proving your worth, you have already lost. Because your worth should be undeniable. It should not require explanation. It should not require proof. It should simply be. And anyone who fails to see it is simply not meant to be in your life. When you understand your self-worth, you develop an unshakable sense of inner peace. You no longer feel the need to chase, to overextend, to prove, or to wait. You stop looking for validation outside of yourself and start creating it within. You realize that the only person whose recognition truly matters is your own. And when you reach that level of self-assurance, no amount of silence, no amount of distance, and no amount of inaction from someone else can shake you. When you redirect your focus inward, everything begins to shift. Most people spend far too much time obsessing over what someone else is doing, thinking, or feeling. They analyze every little action or inaction, trying to decipher hidden meanings, looking for signs, convincing themselves that maybe, just maybe, the silence will break if they just wait a little longer. But waiting is a trap. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of emotional stagnation, hoping for external validation that may never come. The moment you stop focusing on them and start focusing on yourself, you take back your power. The reality is, energy flows where attention goes. If your mind is constantly consumed with thoughts of someone who is watching but never reaching out, you are feeding that energy into the wrong place. You are keeping yourself in a state of limbo, waiting for something outside of your control to change. But what if you took all of that energy, all of that emotional investment, and redirected it into yourself? What if instead of wondering why they are silent, you use that same mental space to build something better for yourself? People who focus inward are the ones who truly elevate in life. They do not sit around waiting for answers from people who cannot even articulate their own feelings. They do not waste their time trying to decode mixed signals. Instead, they pour all of their energy into their own growth, physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually. And the moment they do, everything begins to change. Because when you shift your focus from them to you, you step into a different level of existence. You no longer operate from a place of lack. You no longer feel desperate for closure, for attention, for a sign that you mattered. Instead, you become the kind of person who does not need those things to feel whole. Focusing on yourself is not about ignoring emotions. It is about mastering them. It is about making a conscious decision to stop giving your power away, to stop investing in uncertainty, to stop letting someone else's silence dictate your self-worth. It is about reclaiming your mind, your energy, your sense of direction. It is about asking yourself, what do I need right now? What do I want to build? Who do I want to become? Because the truth is, the more you focus on yourself, the less the outside noise matters. The less the silence of others affects you. The less you find yourself needing validation from people who have already shown you where they stand. One of the biggest shifts happens when you start pouring into yourself. When you take all that energy you once wasted on waiting and use it to build something real. Imagine where you could be in 6 months if you took every single moment of doubt, frustration, and emotional distress and turned it into productivity. Imagine what your life would look like if instead of scrolling through old conversations, you were learning new skills. If instead of overanalyzing their absence, you were leveling up in ways that make you proud. Because that is the difference between those who stay stuck and those who rise. The ones who rise know how to redirect. When you focus on yourself, you also begin to recognize the things you were once blind to. You start to see how much time you wasted waiting for clarity from someone who was never capable of giving it. You start to understand that their silence was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their own emotional immaturity. You start to realize that people who truly care, people who truly see your value, do not leave you questioning. They do not stay in the shadows. They do not wait until you prove yourself. They show up, they communicate, they make their intentions clear. And once you recognize this, you stop craving closure from people who never deserved your energy in the first place. The best part about focusing on yourself is that it naturally creates distance between you and the things that no longer serve you. The more you grow, the more certain people fade from your thoughts. The more you build, the less their silence matters. The more you evolve, the less you find yourself needing answers from those who could not even be honest with themselves, because by then you will have outgrown the need for it entirely. The moment you become obsessed with you, with your growth, your goals, your peace, something shifts in the universe. People who once ignored you suddenly start paying attention. People who once stayed silent suddenly start reaching out. But by then you will have already moved forward. Because when you elevate, you no longer vibrate on the same frequency as the past. You no longer find yourself looking back, waiting, wondering. You will be too focused on where you are going, too consumed with your own success, too fulfilled by the life you are creating to ever look back and wish things had been different. The moment you detach from their silence and truly move forward, something shifts within you. At first, it might feel unnatural, even uncomfortable, because for so long you have been accustomed to waiting for them to acknowledge you, waiting for them to reach out, waiting for some form of validation that never comes. But once you let go of the expectation that they will ever do what you have been hoping for, you free yourself from an invisible chain that has been holding you back. You begin to understand that moving forward is not about forgetting them. It is about reclaiming your energy and investing it where it actually matters. Most people do not realize how much emotional weight they carry when they remain attached to someone's absence. Every time you think about them, every time you check to see if they have watched your stories, every time you replay old conversations in your mind, you are keeping a door open that should have been closed a long time ago. You are keeping yourself in limbo, unable to fully step into the next chapter of your life. The reality is, holding on to their silence does nothing but drain you. It depletes your emotional energy. It keeps you stuck in a cycle where you are constantly waiting for a sign, for a message, for a moment of clarity that may never come. Moving forward is a decision. It is not something that happens passively. It is not something that just occurs when enough time passes. It is something you must choose. You must decide that you are no longer available for emotional limbo. You must decide that you are done waiting for someone who has already shown you their level of investment. You must decide that your energy is too valuable to be spent on someone who could not even find the courage to communicate with you directly. And once you make that decision, everything starts to change. One of the biggest breakthroughs happens when you realize that you do not need closure from them to move on. You do not need an apology. You do not need a final conversation. You do not need them to explain why they chose silence instead of honesty, because at the end of the day, closure is something you give yourself. It is the moment you decide that their inaction speaks louder than any words ever could. It is the realization that silence is an answer, and it is one that you should respect rather than try to change. People who struggle to move on often do so because they still believe there is unfinished business. They convince themselves that if they just hold on a little longer, if they just wait a little more, things will somehow resolve themselves. But life does not work that way. The truth is, when someone wants to be in your life, they will make sure you know it. There will be no confusion. There will be no guessing. There will be no need for waiting. their actions will make it clear. And if their actions are unclear, then that is the answer. That is the closure. Moving forward does not mean you do not care. It does not mean you did not have real feelings. It does not mean you are ignoring what happened. It simply means you are choosing yourself. It means you are no longer willing to let their absence take up space in your mind. It means you are redirecting your energy to things that actually add value to your life. Because the truth is, the more you focus on yourself, the less their silence affects you. The more you grow, the less space they take up in your thoughts. The more you build, the less you find yourself caring whether or not they ever reach out. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you wake up one day and realize you no longer check for them. You no longer wonder what they are doing. You no longer feel that pull toward them. And it is not because you forced yourself to forget. It is because you have outgrown the need for their presence in your life. You have evolved beyond the version of yourself that once craved their attention. You have become someone who is too focused on their own growth, too consumed with their own success, too fulfilled by their own journey to look back. When you truly move forward, you start to attract people and opportunities that match your new level. You begin to connect with those who see your value without hesitation. You start to experience relationships that do not leave you questioning your worth. And the most ironic part? The moment you finally let go, the moment you truly move on, is often the moment they suddenly decide to reach out. But by then, it no longer matters, because you will have already stepped into the next chapter of your life, one where you no longer wait for someone to recognize what has been undeniable all along.